Hi, MED 624, video for class number 4. First thing I'm talking about is a couple of terms. So if you want to write these down or come back to the video and write them down, you can find definitions on the internet, Google, that kind of thing. However, music education being fairly new, certainly music education research, some of these words are currently in the vernacular, but are pretty new. Some of them were in the vernacular 10 years ago, and now they mean something different. So I'm going to give you my definition certainly that Dr. Schlegel and I ascribe to. And some of these are also known by other titles, but these are the titles that we use, a lot of people use. Sound before symbol. The idea of allowing people to hear things or do things on their instruments with their voice before you actually show them the notation. Suzuki method uses this a lot. Elementary teachers are great at it. You walk in the room and the elementary teacher goes, "All right, everybody, clap after me." Then the students clap that back, and you do something different. We don't use those things in our instrumental or vocal ensemble rehearsals as much as we need to, and certainly would be a great way for us to explore improvisation, part of the national standards. But the idea of sound, making a sound, playing music, playing rhythms, demonstrating a musical behavior before you actually see how it's written down. Let them play. Teacher behaviors versus student behaviors. Most research shows that expert teachers demonstrate about 50-50. In other words, about half of the class is student behaviors and half is teacher behaviors. In other words, teacher behaviors being how much they talk, whether it's giving directions or correcting behavior or giving announcements or whatever it is, and the other half being student behaviors, meaning they're doing their skill development, their warm-ups, playing repertoire, just playing straight through the music, sight reading, whatever it is. Student behaviors also includes them asking questions and them answering things, demonstrating, modeling, all of that. Rehearsal frame. Rehearsal frame is when you look at someone's teachings, certainly on video, as soon as they start a new concept or they start to correct a concept, in other words, a choir teacher is going to address tall vowels and going to address some retards that happen at the ends of several phrases. And he or she says, okay, let's start at letter B. Make sure we're going to keep our vowel sounds very, very tall, as we practiced earlier in our scale development part of class. And then make sure you watch all of our phrase endings. I want to make sure that we're being very, very musical with those. So then the teacher rehearses those things, and as long as he or she is rehearsing those things, they are within the rehearsal frame. The rehearsal targets are watching the teacher at the ends of phrases for the musical transitions, and 2, tall vowel sounds. All right, performance trials. How many times that you allow your students to try that, to try to do it well, to demonstrate those phrases, those are all considered trials. Now in research, if we're counting number of trials and we're counting the numbers of rehearsal frames, we tend to not count rehearsal frames where there is only one trial. If I want to look at, you certainly can report that data, but if I want to look at how effective a teacher is, it's probably the repeated behaviors of the teacher that make them most effective. So if someone rehearses something just once and moves on, whether they give feedback or not, that might not be something that's really affecting the student outcomes, the student achievement, the student performance. So I'm really going to look for those rehearsal frames that have 2 or more trials within the frame, and hope that makes sense. Repeated trials, doing it twice would be a repeated trial. And once it's fixed, once it's good enough, once it's great, once it's where you want it, research tells us we should do that at least 3 times. Unfortunately, a lot of weak teachers, novice teachers, beginning teachers will fix something and go, yeah, that's it, we got it, and then they'll move on to the next thing. And research shows that we need to do it at least 2 more times. So repeated, corrected trials, and the magic number there is 3. Performance outcomes, exactly what you would think it would be. I go to contest and I perform, and that performance is an outcome of all the rehearsals and all the teaching. Performance outcomes, however, can and should apply to the end of the day, the end of a rehearsal frame. What are the outcomes of all the efforts that went into that rehearsal frame to produce high student achievement? Retention, not only keeping students in your program or keeping students from one semester to the next in your program, but retention meaning what students remember, and going back to the idea of repeated corrected performance trials, we tend to retain that information much better if there are at least 3 of those. Also, we'll talk about primacy and recency. Primary things, in other words, at the beginning of class, I do something and I'm very, very adamant and animated about that thing. And at the very end of class, I do something. Primacy and recency, what I did primarily, the first thing I did, the thing that I emphasized the most, and even though it's 30 minutes later, 40 minutes later, 3 days later, we tend to remember those things, and we also tend to remember those things that are most recent. We tend to latch onto those educationally. Not always, not 100% of the time, but that idea of primacy and recency being very, very important to how we think, how we process, how we remember, and how we retain information. Scribe. Scribe is an acronym, SCRIBE, all capital letters. You're welcome to look it up. Might be interesting actually for you to look that up on Google. It will take you to the University of Texas, their music ed department. Scribe is software that they have developed so that if you're watching a videotape of yourself teaching or someone else teaching, you can go into the software and create buttons. In other words, let's say I want to count how many times the teacher says watch. So I'm gonna tell the software to make a button. It can be blue, purple, green, orange, whatever color I want, and I'm going to call it watch. I also want to count how many times they say listen. So if I have a blue button for watch and a green button for listen, maybe I have an orange button for stop. Maybe a red button for the word again. How often do we say again in rehearsal? And so I watch the video, and every time those things happen, I push down the buttons. And what happens is Scribe will give me a frequency count of those 4 things. Now, let's say that I want to see not only how often they say the word watch, but in what context, and is the teacher talking for about a minute about the student's ability or inability to watch and watch carefully. I could push the button down and keep it down, and as soon as we're not really talking about watching anymore, I let go. So I do that for all 4 of these behaviors: watching, listening, stop, whatever the other words I mentioned. Scribe will also compute not only frequency, but the amount of time spent in the rehearsal doing those things. It will also give me mean. Every time that the teacher talked about watching, what's the mean length of time that they did that, and the duration. How long do we do it each time? So pretty cool, very, very beneficial. Something that Dr. Schlegel and I have talked about using a lot more. If we can get that software into our lab and hopefully into the hands, certainly, of our student teachers, it's a great program even for those of us that teach continually, rehearse still, to watch our rehearsals and account for our behaviors. Multisensory whole brain learning. We've talked about multisensory learning before, very, very important. We also talk about whole brain learning. There are lots of videos on YouTube about both of these things. Whole brain learning, again with vernacular changing over the years, whole brain learning meaning multisensory learning. If I can involve sight, smell, taste, hearing, tactile, sensory, I'm going to learn something better. Whole brain learning has kind of taken that and adopted it into a style of teaching that's now called whole brain learning, but we've actually labeled a way of teaching, a methodology of teaching called whole brain learning. It's like being a rock and roll band and going, what do we call ourselves? Rock and roll band. Great. Well, your band doesn't necessarily define what a rock and roll band is, but that's what you've decided to title it. So whole brain learning is now a technique, a developed, taught methodology that's adopted the word whole brain learning, although whole brain learning is an overall larger concept that has a lot to do with multisensory learning. All right, so those are the words and the definitions, which I will post those up on Blackboard. The next thing I want to talk about, and I would advise you to do this either now, later tonight, tomorrow, next day, whenever. Sit down and start making a list of targets, rehearsal targets. Talk about what those are within a rehearsal frame, within a rehearsal. I have things that I'm going to target to make better. Most students in this activity will write about 8 things down and then have a very long pause. And then the brain will kind of click into another mode of thinking and they go, oh, also all these things. And they'll write down about 6 more things. And then the average student, I find, kind of stops there. So I would encourage you to really think through all the things you could be rehearsing in a rehearsal. Don't get outside, however, of actual skill development, technique, music making, repertoire, those kinds of things. You could teach your students how to fill out a form for their World's Greatest Chocolate fundraiser, but I don't want you to include those things. Or the school implements a new way of signing out when you go to the dentist during the school day. Not those things. All things that would be related to your actual classroom teaching of music, music skills, music making. So do that on your own. I will talk about that more next week. We did that in class with all the students that are on campus, and pretty soon I think we came up with probably 30 to 35 different things, and I imagine that there's a lot more of them out there. You can, of course, become very, very specific, teaching saxophones, alternate fingerings to C sharp, teaching vocalist vibrato, non-vibrato, teaching vocalist vibrato speed, teaching vocalist slow to fast vibrato speed, different techniques of holding the bow, so on and so forth. Don't get too detailed. Things that you would watch someone rehearse, and if you saw them rehearse over 10 days, you would see these same kind of targets come up over and over again. So hopefully that makes sense and will help you some. Best practice. All these things we talked about, all these words are related to best practice. I don't know if I've mentioned this yet, but this is probably a good lesson to do this. Go into University of Southern Mississippi Library, go to articles and databases, and type in the word scribe and kind of start looking at some of that research that uses that software. And I will also encourage you to type in the word behavioral analysis. I guess that's 2 words. Behavioral analysis. You should find my dissertation and some others. Some use Scribe, some don't. But those research articles are specifically about best practice and defining best practice by watching what experts do and counting how many times they say things, how long they say things, in what context do they say things, how often do they give feedback, what kind of feedback, is it positive or is it negative, do they give more negative feedback when talking about style or more negative feedback when talking about musicality, and all those details of teaching that are informing our profession, informing best practice. Hope you guys are all doing well, and we'll see you next time.